Society of Trauma Nurses. Our presenter today is Betsy Seislove.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first STN webinar. And we're excited to put this off, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that all our technology works. So I'm going to take this opportunity, and we're going to go through a couple slides first. First of all, I'd like to have a disclosure statement that I have no disclosures. I have no nothing to hide from any of you. And just also note that this session is being recorded. Now, you're all muted at this time. Throughout this presentation, you're going to be asked a couple questions that STN is going to poll you. So there might be a question of, years that you have been involved in trauma nursing, and there's going to be a polling opportunity that we're going to ask you to use your computer and file in those answers. And then also, I'm going to be asking a couple questions throughout this presentation that you'll see a chat box over in your right-hand corner that if you have the opportunity, if I might ask you a question, to throw in some of your answers. Please also have the opportunity to throw in some comments. And then there's also an area, I believe, that you can ask questions. So the hope is that we can get through this presentation and then we'll have time at the end to answer questions. If we don't have time to answer the questions, our goal is to pull all those questions together, also pull all the comments and maybe some suggestions together, and we're going to pull all that information together and send it all back to you, everybody that's participating in this webinar, so then you have pieces of information and you'll have answers to your questions, and then hopefully there will be something that many of you can take and use for your daily practice. This activity is actually, you'll get 0.75 contact hours. What will happen is after the webinar, you will be sent an email with an online evaluation. So take the opportunity to fill that out to get your CEU, and you should, within then the next 5 to 10 business days, they will send you your certificate. If that doesn't happen, just email STN or give them a call. But as long as you get the email, fill out the evaluation, hopefully you'll get everything that you need. So with that, our learning objectives for today is we wanted to recall what drew you to care for the injured patients. What made you get into trauma care? And then we're going to talk about a couple things that makes us great trauma nurses or healthcare providers. And we're going to talk about some collaborative practices as well to kind of enhance our practice. So why did I pick this topic? This topic to me was it was a very sensitive thing. I wanted to know why we get up in the morning and why we come to work. I want our healthcare providers to be the best that they can be. So I wanted to know what drives us. So, and I'm a true believer, if you believe in something, all things are possible. I believe that we're all good people. Somebody always said to me that, there are people sometimes that are just, not in a good mood, or they're not feeling good, or they're stressed that day. I'm a true believer that that person didn't wake up that morning and say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to be in a bad mood today. It's something that happens. And to help us practice every day and understand that, these are the things that we have to kind of pay attention to. So I wanted to know why people, again, why they got into trauma, what made them do that, and what drives us to come to work. Why do you wake up in the morning? Are you excited to come into work? So then I wanted to know, like, okay, those are those positives, but what also frustrates us? But with that frustration, what can we change? What can we make better? I'm a true believer in, if you have a frustration, if you have something to complain about, also bring maybe a potential solution, or at least opportune for that brainstorming to see how we can make it better. So why this topic? I want us to empower ourselves to be the best that we can be. And one of the things that came up, and you'll see that later on in the presentation, was looking at generational differences. And I'll kind of highlight that because that was what came out when I kind of interviewed a couple different people. There are various people throughout life, and you have to learn how to deal with those people. Communication, that's the ultimate of what we have to do every day, change, and then talk about a little mentoring strategies. And all of these put together really kind of confound what makes us those great healthcare providers. So what I did is I went out and let me go back, sorry. I went and talked to a lot of different people, tried to get some answers from people. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask Kim, I would like to poll the audience today. And Kim, I believe you'll pose the question on how many years have you actually been a trauma provider? So take an opportunity on your computer and answer that question if you don't mind. And we'll give you about 20 seconds to answer that.
Okay, so we'll have about 3 more seconds before we close the poll. And you should see the results.
Okay, I'm not seeing the results. I might have pushed the wrong button. Hold on. Audience response.
It looks like we have 24% in the 0 to 5 category, 22% in the 6 to 10, 24% in the 11 to 19, and 29% in the 20 plus. So we've got a pretty even variety of participants today.
Okay, great. All right, so then the next question is, what is your role currently within the trauma program? So I'll have Kim poll that question.
Give you about 5 more seconds. Okay, and it looks like about 61% are trauma program managers or administration, 12% ICU, 5% in med-surg, 1% APNs, and 20% fall into the other category.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind, those other people that have the 20%, if you don't mind going into that chat box and kind of typing who that other 20% is, because that's a pretty high number. And then it looks like the rest of us are a lot of trauma program managers, but we still have some staff nurses, which is great. So, oops, let me go this way. Hold on. So just a little bit about myself and why I got into trauma nursing. One was my father was a physician, but he truly had no influence on getting me into healthcare. I actually wanted to be an interior design or a decorator or an architect. That's what I loved to do in high school. But then my junior year in high school, that summer before my junior year and before my brother's senior year, he got into a pretty devastating car accident. And he was actually a patient at the hospital I'm working at now. And when I went to visit him and I saw him, I just had this desire of, I need to take care of him, and trauma is just something that is probably something I want to do. So I completely changed my thought, and I thought, I want to be a nurse. So of course that made my father happy, but that's why I wanted to be a nurse, not necessarily my father being a physician. So I went to school in Philadelphia, and then I lived in Philadelphia, and I worked not in the trauma center, but I worked in the neuro ICU. But then some conferences came around, and we would have occasional trauma patients coming into our neuro ICU. But I went to a trauma conference actually in Camden, New Jersey, and I thought, you know, this is something I want to do. So there was a position open back at my hospital that I'm currently working now at Lehigh Valley Hospital, and I applied to work in the shock trauma unit, and that was where it started. I started back in 1989, and I've been in trauma ever since. And one of my mentors was Dr. Michael Rhodes, and many of you know Dr. Rhodes, or at least have heard of him, but he really kind of guided me through what I wanted to do every day. So what I did then is I went and I interviewed ICU nurses, med-surg nurses, ED nurses, pre-hospital nurses, as well as paramedics and EMTs. And I put some of these comments together because I think it really resonated on why we do what we do. Many of them said they had big pictures, big glasses on, and they wanted to save the world. They wanted the opportunity to have the ability to change somebody's life, to make that injured patient, get them better and get them back into their normal life. So that was a big comment, and I appreciated that one. Many of us have mentors that we looked back on, Florence Nightingale and Claire Barton, looking at those healthcare providers. But then you look at, Mother Teresa and Princess Diana, who had more of a global picture, who wanted to heal and help, especially the underserved. So many people had identified them as people that they looked up to. But this was a great one. I loved many, especially my pre-hospital providers that I spoke to. The classic emergency, they were definitely, something that really strived them and really kind of resonated with them too. They wanted to get into trauma. But then they also kind of said what they didn't like in regards to some of the nursing portrayals was, some of these cartoon characters or things like that. Some of them said, we're more than that. We're more professional than Nurse Betty or Betty Boop. But it's out there. But some people had noted that. But then the big one was that many of us are in a time period of our life that we've had the opportunity to either take care of a sick child or a sick parent or a sick sibling or a sick husband or a wife, sick parent, and that really kind of also gave us the idea that we wanted to help people and make things better. Several people actually have identified that this was their second career. They either started as a school teacher or they started, in a different field and decided, you know what, I want to change this. I want to get into healthcare. So a couple people had said, that this is what their second career was. But I always looked at nursing, and many of them, this word opportunity came up more than once. And I found this slide, and I have a true believer, you'll always miss 100% of the shots if you don't take them. So many of these people took the opportunity to get into healthcare and into nursing, and specifically trauma. Many of my pre-hospital colleagues said, they came across this or they would see this and said, wait a second, I see that we can do better out in the field. I want to be that person who's taking care of that patient who's involved in that car accident. And then my EMS providers as well. They have a true passion. And many healthcare providers that I spoke to, that's where they started. That's where they got their direction. So at this point in time, what really stood out to me was there was various generation differences and lots of different thoughts about what we can do better, why we went into nursing. So at this point in time, I'm going to go into talking about baby boomers and Generation X and Y, but I'd like to poll the audience again. And if you can tell me who you are. Are you a baby boomer, an X, a Y, or you don't want to tell me?
Also, while we finish up the poll in the last few seconds, I've posed a couple of questions in the chat box. Be sure that you're using the chat box and reply to the entire audience so everyone can see. If you or respond in the question box, I'm the only one can see it. But if you make sure you're in that chat box to the entire audience, we can share that discussion with everyone. So I've closed that poll, and it looks like, again, we have a nice variety. We only have 6% of you that don't want to tell us what generation you are. So we have 34% on here as baby boomers, 45% in Generation X, and 16% Y.
All right. Okay. Well, that'll be good. We have a nice diversity between the baby boomers and the Generation X, but the Generation Ys are going to be really important here as we go through this. So the baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1964, and I looked at over these values, and I'm a true believer that these values do hit me. I really feel very close to my family. My daughter always calls me an overachiever. I think I'm sometimes not an overachiever. I just work too hard and work too much is probably what it is. But I live to work sometimes, and that I don't know if that's always the healthiest thing, but I do love my work. I love what I do, and it does drive me, every day of what I do. And I do have a loyalty to what I do every day too. So that is something a baby boomer carries with them. These are some of the things that we lived through, in the baby boomer age. Everybody remembers the Beatles. They were our big music group. But these comments kind of resonated with me. A couple people had said, people purpose. It drives my passion to make a difference in people's lives. It's what causes me to live and breathe nursing every day. So that was a baby boomer that was speaking to me. And they also said nursing is just not part of my life. It's who I am. So I thought that was just a wonderful statement. Nursing is just not part of my life. It's who I am. So I thought that was really, really great. And I always love this picture because I'm a true person like this. I believe that I can keep up with the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds, and I have to remind myself that I'm not 30 and 40 anymore, but it does help me throughout my day sometimes. And the other thing that baby boomers, came up, and as I was investigating kind of baby boomers, there's variation, and life is so variable but we look at it as a positive and a negative, where some people will truly only look at it as like, no, variation can't happen. But baby boomers can go either way. So then we get into the next category, which sounds like the other group is the 45% of you that are the Generation X. And you are really not, you're out more, you look for, I'm going to do something, and what is it that I'm going to gain from that? So you look at, you have it all. You try to pull everything together, and you multitask very well. And you want to have a wonderful social life. You want to be part of groups. You want to have a flourishing career. You want to pull it all together. And it's a huge balance for you. But you've learned how to do it. This generation was the Latchkey Kids. And I know my kids are the Latchkey Kids. You come home at a certain age, you're like, okay, you come home from school, and you have to learn how to figure it out. So this Generation X is pretty diverse, very diverse. And I love this slide, too, where the little boy's talking to the mom. I have to do my homework now, Mom. I'll get to the computer when I finish. So trying to help probably me as the baby boomer, help me with the computer. This kid's like, nope, I got to do this first. And then this slide I always thought was cute. Sure, your device will save the world, but what's in it for me? So that question resonates in that Generation X. And then there's that younger generation where my children are in that younger generation. So again, when I was looking through this and investigating it, I was like, yeah, that really does kind of match it. They're very optimistic. They are pretty realistic. They're still very individualized. But they are so flexible that, hey, if this isn't going this way, I'll go do something else. They are not probably as intertwined their institution. They are like, okay, they're the ones who change the jobs every 3, 4, 5 years. So us as baby boomers that have been hanging around for 15, 20 years, we have to understand where the Generation Y is coming. They are constantly looking for another opportunity, and that's okay with them. And they're rewriting the rules. And this generation, very technologically savvy. So I won't even tell you what Kim and I have been doing the past day or two, just making sure this webinar would go off, because I'm not the technologically savvy person. So, but they are on it, and they are on social media, and that's how they communicate. And those are important pieces, especially within your daily practice, on how to communicate with this younger generation. The slide down there on the right where it says Generation Gap 2008, like I'm the lady standing on the right, and my daughter's there on the left, or a newer nurse is there on the left. We have to start to learn to speak our languages so we can understand each other. Very diverse. This group has diversity that probably we could learn from. So, the more difficult the problem, the greater the challenge. So this group is very diverse in regarding to do that. So at this time, I'm going to go through some of the frustrations that we identified talking to people, but take a moment, if you would, and in that chat box, just type some of your frustrations. And again, what we're going to do is identify some of those frustrations and kind of send everything back to you. But these are some of the frustrations that I identified as I interviewed other people. Several of them said they have no frustrations. Isn't that a wonderful place to be? But what they said was they've worked at other places, they've had other jobs, and they were pretty happy with where they are. So that was great to hear. That was awesome. One of the other frustrations that several of you identified were the demands of society from the family. The families really, they come in now, obviously with the social media and the internet access. They come in with a lot more knowledge than ever before. I, as a baby boomer, didn't have the internet to search a disease process or an injury. Well, these families come in, and sometimes they have the accurate information, sometimes they don't. So that's a struggle for us sometimes, where we try to really kind of give the family a full picture, but they're throwing back information that they learned off the internet. And patients. Patients can be difficult at times too. We know trauma patients are different than any other patient, and it's frustrating from that perspective. Plus, sometimes they're so injured that it hurts us not to be able to fix them to the best of our abilities. So some of those are frustrations. And then the ever-dreaded paperwork. Even though we have computer systems and computers supposed to save the world and it's supposed to take away the paper, sometimes there's more paper. But the nurses and pre-hospital said there's just so much documentation, but we also know how important documentation is. But a lot of the nurses, and I know again when we talk about these generation gaps, the baby boomers, which I sit in, again, we're not the most computer savvy, so it takes us a little bit longer to do our computer work, our paperwork, and it takes away from our patient care. So that was a frustration. Some of you felt like you were the catch-all, meaning that, you know, you get dumped on constantly. You get dumped on by ancillary personnel. You get dumped on by the families and the patient and the doctor. So they just kind of felt swarmed sometimes, and they had to learn how to block that out. Sometimes frustrations kind of fend up, and then just even minor things, you know, kind of put them over the edge. Doing more with less. I think we're all sitting in that boat where, you know, we are asked to do more because reimbursements are down. It's a whole cost shifting, so we're asked to do more with less. Patient-to-nurse ratio kind of goes along with doing more with less. And then the entitlement, where patients feel entitled, families feel entitled, some nurses feel entitled. So again, that was an area that people identified as a frustration. There was a huge piece on feeling that nursing, pre-hospital providers were under-recognized and underappreciated. And I know we deal with that, you know, constantly listening to an area, especially if you work in a larger institution, sometimes they're like, how come they didn't identify us? And it's, again, I go back to that first slide. It's usually not intentional, but it's usually, it could be potentially overlooked. So again, back to the beginning, I want us to be able to empower ourselves, be proud of the nurse or the provider that you are, and be proud of who you are. Love to know what happened to my patient. Don't you all want to know, a lot of times, don't you love when that patient comes back into your unit and you're like, wait a second, I recognize you, but when you left, you were still in a hospital gown. And when they come walking in, that's what makes your job. That's what makes you wake up every day to come back and do it again. Too many complaints about our own people. Isn't that sometimes the truth, where, you know, somebody is having a bad day and they're going on and on and on. It takes a lot of energy out of us. It takes a lot out of the person who's complaining, but it takes a lot out of us from listening. so again, when we get into some of how we can fix it, maybe there are some ways that we can kind of dispel that a little bit and bring that down. Some people complained about their pay structure, and that's a reality. And then some actually had, and this kind of hurt me a little bit, that there was a couple nurses that just felt like other nurses were getting burnt out, that they just didn't have the most positive attitude towards their patients. And that kind of saddened me. So we kind of talked back and forth of how can we make that better as well. Not everyone's working up to their capacity. There's apathy, which kind of almost goes back to that nurse that's kind of getting burned out and not having, the care that they used to have for their patients. We're going to talk about collaboration, but some of the frustrations weren't always working together. You're working in a unit, and not everybody's working together, but you all know those nights when you're working and it's starting to hit the fan and everybody's working together. That night goes smooth as silk. But if there's not that collaboration or communication, it seems to kind of fall apart. Cooperation, and then the ultimate of everything that we do is communication. We've got to be open, we've got to be honest, and we've got to keep communication constantly going and constantly moving. So just kind of a slide. This one I always liked. I don't need your blah, blah, blah help, but I need you to listen. So that's a piece of communication that sometimes people said they were frustrated. They said, people just don't always listen to me. So there was a lot of frustrations there, and I invite that if any of you have any other frustrations that you can put in here, I'd love for to hear what your frustrations are. But I also said, okay, here's your frustrations, but help me understand what we can do to change that. One of the things that somebody said, now this isn't a change factor, but they would have gotten their degree right away. They would have, that was one of their things that they would have changed or had more insight in at that point in time, but it just wasn't the right time in life. One of the things that they also said was to help patients and families is help patients live their last moments. And that was very important to many of them where, that lack of communication or their entitlement came in, that nurse kind of stepped up a little higher and said, how can I make it better for you? And if you kind of throw it back to the patient and the family, sometimes they come down, and then you can start to work together. Number one, understanding the severity of their injury, but then also maybe help them make some decisions for later on in life or later on to get discharged. Potential for advancement. Some nurses, were kind of, they should have taken that move sooner. Us as baby boomers might not, we might not take as many challenges as the younger generation. So, go for it. Many of them said, I would have changed that. I would have done that. Patient-to-nurse ratios, if they would have maybe spoke up a little bit more or fought more for making sure that patient ratios were established. Again, it comes to communication. Several of the nurses, especially the ICU nurses, wanted to be more involved in nursing studies, which I thought was really kind of interesting. But the way they kind of spoke to it was, if we did more studies, it might help us make a possible change within our area, especially maybe an area of frustration. So I thought that was a great thing, and I entertain always the idea of how can we do it better. And if there's a research opportunity, let's try for it. And recognition, I always look back at recognition that we as nurses have to really empower ourselves. And I invite any of you that aren't STN members to become part of STN, because STN really pushes the envelope to really identify us as nurses, healthcare providers, and really put us out there in the forefront. And that goes right together with professionalism. And how we communicate with each other. Again, if we understand potentially where the other person is coming from, communication and lines of communication can become much more open and much more fluent. We have to have more critical thinking. what we also found was one of the changes that somebody identified was, the frustration with paperwork and computer work. And sometimes it takes us away from the bedside, they said. And they said, you know what, if we could just get back to the bedside and sometimes bring back the basics. And what is our critical thinking? What's our clinical thinking? And, let's pull that stethoscope out of our pockets and actually use it rather than, typing on a computer. So I thought that was, in the day and age of computer work, let's get back down to the basics. Empowerment, we kind of talked about that. Public education. I know many of us as trauma centers, some of us do a great job in marketing, not only marketing our trauma centers, but marketing us as trauma providers. I think a lot of people struggle of getting that message out to the public. Some people, again, do a great job. One way to do it is through prevention activities or health fairs or social media. I know many hospitals, if not all by now, have Facebook pages, and I think they even have Twitter pages and things like that. So, they're moving along that way to educate the public on what a trauma center is and what a nurse is. Provide nurses with more tools. Sometimes the nurse feels like they don't have everything, and some of the nurses said, if I would just have a couple of different things at my bedside or at my access, that would help me, and easier access than having to scroll through, the internet or something like that. And then the last thing is many of them said, they loved many of their nursing professors, but they would have loved to have a true mentor while they were going through their nursing education at the hospital. So the next thing we're going to get into is we're going to talk about teaching and mentoring. But we have a question for you in regards to mentoring, and I think Kim will pose that, and it will actually ask you, have you ever been in a mentoring relationship? And so it's going to ask you if you've been a mentee, a mentor, or you've never had that opportunity.
Give you about 5 more seconds to answer. Okay. And it looks like on our results we have 73% of participants who have been a mentor, okay. 52% have been a mentee, and we have 18% on the call that have never experienced a mentor relationship.
Okay, how many were a mentee?
52%.
52, okay, good. All right, well, it sounds like a lot of you have had the opportunity, especially to be a mentor. I think that's great, and I think, if you don't mind throwing some comments out of the chat area on what you found to be the most positive out of being a mentor. And then those that have been a mentee, why don't you also throw out some comments that what you took from being a mentee and what changed what you did and how did it improve your daily work. So mentoring, when I looked at, again, this generational gap, and I've had the opportunity to be a mentor and a mentee, and both have been extremely positive experience for me. So for the X generation, they are casual, they like a friendly work environment. They like to be involved, so if you can get them involved, don't just throw a couple things at them, get them involved. They need flexibility, they love the freedom, and they love a place to learn, okay? And then the Ys, they like a structured, supportive work environment. So they like a little bit more structure. So the X's are more flexible, the Ys are more structured. They're much more personal work, but they take that personal work, but then they also like to interact with that relationship. But I like the one for the Ys. They like demands, and they're prepared for demands. So they rise to the occasion, and they carry high expectations. So those are some of the things that you have to keep in your mind if you're mentoring an X or a Y. And some of the components of being what is true mentoring, a lot of times, sometimes you can't just say, okay, well, Sally, you're going to be assigned to Joe. That doesn't always work. A lot of times the way to make it work is sometimes it's spontaneous, where you start in a unit and you're being precepted by Joe, but you realize that Jane, next door, you're really starting to bond with her. So it becomes almost a spontaneous relationship. And then it becomes almost a natural bond. And then you can kind of start working together. And it's not that Joe's not doing a good preceptorship, but the bond between Jane and yourself is a much more positive. A mentor is very supportive, and they're a champion for you. They're the ones who are going to be backing you up, good, bad, or the ugly. They're going to be there with you. And they're going to have the ability to draw on your strengths. They're going to see things in you that you won't be able to see. And you're going to deny them and say, I don't see that. But that mentor is going to keep supporting those efforts until all of a sudden you're going to be like, I get it. And you're going to feel that strength from that. It's a huge collaboration, and that collaboration will spread as the two of you grow together. And you're constantly celebrating those accomplishments, but you're also identifying your failures. I don't like to say failure. We always say opportunities for improvement, but we identify those and we move forward from those. Those are absolute learning opportunities. If we don't identify where our opportunities are, we can't grow. So a mentor really has to have good organizational skills, productivity, has to have good communication, positive public self-image, high personal integrity, and worthwhile purpose. That mentor has to be a strong person. Not saying that, many of us, 73% of us that have been mentors, have you had a bad day that all of a sudden your organizational skills go out the window? Absolutely. But you're able to really pull this together and act as that role model for that mentee. And the mentors will help make some decisions. As a mentee, I always called my mentor, when I was struggling with a couple things, I'd call them and say, all right, walk me through this. This is what I'm thinking. Am I thinking the right way? And, they'd either celebrate my opportunity or they would challenge and say, wait a second, let's regroup that. They'll help guide find the answers. And how is the job really done? As a mentor, you're that role model. So that mentee is going to look up to say, all right, you know what? I see what she's doing or he's doing. Let me see if I can model that. And you're constantly learning, from each other. The mentor will also help you improve your balance between work and life. That's a huge thing for all of us. We're trying to figure out where that sensitive balance is, and I'd probably be a wealthy person if I could tell you exactly what that is, but I think we all try to do our best with that. The mentor will also help improve, your daily performance, and it will help, hopefully, your whole global life, not only your work, but also your home life. So Sir Isaac Newton said, I see further, it will be because I stand on the shoulders of a giant. So when you mentor and you mentee, when you work together, you can see so far and you can get there. You can get there if you have that relationship. And Pat Mannion, many of you know Pat, and she said it best. She said, the mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, and the great teacher inspires. So I took that and I loved that because I think that's what the mentor does, and the mentee learns from that, because mentoring is not an empty tile. It comes with responsibility. And if you can show and inspire and demonstrate, you both learn. I think it's awesome. So a couple more quotes, and then we'll get into a couple pieces of a collaboration, and then I think we're almost at the end of our time. But some of these quotes I kind of live by. Next to knowing when to seize an opportunity, the most important thing in life is to know when to forego an advantage. So again, what you do in your daily life, seize that moment, seize the opportunity, and go for it. Knowing what you can do not to do is more important than knowing what you can do. And I always try to turn every disaster into an opportunity. There are some people who live in a dream world, and those are some who face reality. And then those are those who turn one into another. The person born with a talent they are meant to use will find the greatest happiness in using it. and I won't accept anything less than the best a player's capable of doing, and he has the right to expect the best that I can do for him and the team. And it is a fine thing to have the ability, but the ability to discover ability in others is the true test. So all of those quotes, it just kind of hit me and said, you know what, there's so much opportunity that if we see it, if we can see past some of our frustrations, make that change, maybe mentor somebody, teach somebody, work together with somebody, look at all the things that we can do. So a couple more things just on collaboration, where I think that's a vital piece. So we said the mentor and mentee, they're a collaborative relationship, but then how do we also collaborate not only internally but externally? So Kim, I think we have one more question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how well would you rate collaboration with your own internal organization?
Give you about 5 more seconds. Okay, a couple more still answering. Okay. Looks like we have pretty good collaboration. We only had 1% that said poor.
Okay.
22% said fair.
Okay.
31% said satisfactory. 39% said it was good. And we had 7% who said it was excellent.
All right. So those of you who said, I'm gonna stretch out there, go from satisfactory, fair, and poor. If you don't mind throwing out some of your comments in the chat box to say why you feel your collaboration isn't good or excellent, it would just maybe give us the opportunity to identify maybe some of the opportunities that we would have. But I think collaboration is so vitally important. It's a long history of humankind. It improvises most effectively, and it makes us prevail if we can collaborate. And alone, I love this one from Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. Such a simple saying, but isn't that the truth? So collaboration builds a culture that transforms performance and empowers outstanding clinical, and I threw the financial outcomes in there. But it goes back to everything we've talked about. You know, we've identified frustrations, we've identified maybe some of the changes, then we've talked about how we can form a mentoring relationship, and it really comes to collaboration. And if we communicate and collaborate, it transforms what we do every day. And it helps us share a vision, and it really puts the value and it tracks, you know, why we got into healthcare in the first place. We have to collaborate to be able to provide the best care possible. And many of us live in a true trauma system, where that trauma system not only may be in your state, nationally, or within your own environment, it really coordinates the efforts in a defined geography, again, wherever that might be, that delivers a full range of care to all injured patients, and it's integrated into your local health system. So when I looked at this quote, I really looked at it really from my own internal system and how can we help my community. And then how can I look at it statewide? Because you have to kind of resonate where you are back at home. And inclusive of trauma centers and non-trauma centers and the people that work in that system. You know, again, after you resonate within your own institution, how do you get out to the other? How do you get out to the other institutions, the people that transfer patients to you? So collaboration, strategic planning takes time and money, but if we can save lives and save our lives better, what we say is it's priceless. So we really need to take the time and the effort. So those who think that they have poor or fair or even satisfactory collaboration, how can we make it better? You know, what are those components that you might be missing? And Dr. Callie, as many of us know from the shock trauma down in Maryland, every ill and injured patient, despite injury severity and ability to pay, should receive the utmost health care. So again, working together to provide that and to assure that. And the golden hour theory comes into play, and again, that pulls in our pre-hospital providers. So some of the areas that we've been able to collaborate and communicate not only internally but externally, we have some telemedicine opportunities, and if any of you have that opportunity, I really kind of raise the bar and make sure you prosper as much as you can from those. This was one of our clinical collaborations that we had, and this is also a collaboration where we do some education, where we do performance improvement. Again, you're collaborating with an outside facility. So if you have that technology and you haven't used it within your own system, I challenge you to go ahead and do it, because it only enhances both systems, and it gives you the opportunity to have open dialogue and increase your communication. And then down at your daily level, you know, we have to collaborate every day with our patients, family, ancillary personnel, doctors, nurses. We're collaborating all the time. So I go back to that first slide. Somebody's having a bad day. It's not because they want to have a bad day. So increase that communication, help that collaboration, and it will turn into a positive for you. So to end, I want you to take a look at, you know, be that change factor, be that mentor, be that teacher, and to work jointly, which to me as a nurse is paramount to be successful in outcomes for our caring of our patients. So be that person. Empower yourself to be the best that you can be. So in closing, I want us to be the best we can every day. Look past some of those frustrations and come with some solutions. If you can be a mentor, take the opportunity. And if you don't feel you can be a mentor, maybe look for a mentor and be a mentee. Concentrate on good communication skills. If you can communicate well, it's contagious to all. Rather than constantly complaining, try to communicate in a positive or bring solutions. Understand people's diversity, which is really huge. We have to understand where people are coming from. And then don't think about change. Make the change a reality. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to do this webinar. And I think I only went over by a couple minutes, but you'll see my email address there as well as my phone number. And then what we're going to do with all your comments, your questions, anything else that you have in this chat box, Kim and I are going to compile that, and we're going to send that back out to you probably in the next 5 to 10 business days. And hopefully we can match some of the frustrations or challenges with some opportunities, you know, that you can make a change in wherever your frustrations are, or give you some answers to being a mentor or mentee. So again, I thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.